So it also gives me a great pleasure to introduce Professor Ian Williams. Now, Ian is from the University of Southampton, where he holds the chair of Applied Environmental Science. Now, his areas of interest are very broad. They go from the top of the atmosphere to probably the bottom of the ocean, and certainly into your dustbin. And his interest is in the practical aspects of pollution and how it affects the planet and how it affects you. On his website, he's got an essay that he wrote about what his interests were. And in it, he signed off as Ian Williams, Professor of Bunny Hugging and Dustbin Studies, and not an engineer. So I don't think the topic tonight involves rabbits. It may do. But I'm sure that at the end of this evening, you will be much better informed about pollution, and particularly atmospheric pollution. And with such a breadth of knowledge, I'm sure he'll look forward to answering your questions. But now let me hand over to Ian.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for turning out tonight to see me. I know a large number of you had better offers, and you decided to come here instead, so I better be good. As well as being a professor of bunny hugging and dustbin studies, I'm also known as the Welsh windbag. So please keep an eye on my waffling and overrunning. I'm sure you will. I've done 7 hours of lecturing today already. This is my 8th. So if my voice starts to go, please forgive me. Lubrication always helps, of course, yeah. So I'm going to talk to you today about air pollution and climate change. It's going to be very varied. It's going to be a bit whiz-bang. I'm going to introduce some politics. And the reason I'm going to introduce some politics is not that I'm going to take any political sides, but politics is very important when it comes to air pollution. And I'm a professional environmental scientist, and I have been since the 1980s, you can tell, okay, all right? And one of the things I pride myself on is being objective and evidence-based. And if you can't be objective and evidence-based as a scientist, there's not much point in being a scientist, in my opinion. So I used to avoid discussing politics altogether. However, it's become such a dominant force in society in terms of denying the evidence that I now deliberately talk about it, and I will do today. So I'm going to talk about climate change. I'm going to talk about what's happening, why it's happening, and I'm also going to talk about some of the things that are happening in our world today, which are a big change. So the amount of satellites going up into space, the amount of space missions that are going up, and what impact is that having on our environment? What impact is that having on the atmosphere? And we've done a little bit of research on that. I'll talk about that too. Now, one of the things I won't talk about much, but one I want to really highlight is that I go into schools a lot. I go into primary schools and I go into secondary schools a lot. And the reason, and I also go into SEND schools, if you know what a SEND school is, with emotional and disabilities, and I even go and work with children who have no voice, and I try and give them a voice. And I think it's so important in today's world that there are many people who don't get an opportunity to hear about air pollution, who have a view on it and who have a long future on our planet, and I like to try and give them a voice too. Hence I will talk a little bit, and you will see a little bit about young people here today. I'm sure many of you know what climate change is, but it's often misrepresented, I think. It's long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. Now, these shifts are often described as natural, so variations in the solar cycle. But the reality is that most climate change is caused by what we do on planet Earth. And of course, we started with the Industrial Revolution in Britain. A lot of the major engineering activities that have influenced the world started in the United Kingdom, and it's really been human activities based on engineering inventions, I guess, that have been the main driver of climate change, mainly burning fossil fuels, but as we'll see, not entirely. There's a lot of other things that cause climate change. The things that we're all familiar with, the use of petrol and diesel for driving a car or coal for heating, clearing land and forests releases carbon dioxide and other gases, landfills, and we've got some experts on waste management in the audience. They've been a major source of greenhouse gases. And then, of course, the energy industry, transport, buildings, agriculture, land use, and so on. Now, if you don't know what a greenhouse gas is, also known as GHGs, these are gases in the Earth's atmosphere that trap heat. So what happens is that during the day, the sun shines down through the Earth's atmosphere, which goes up to more than 100 kilometers above the Earth, and the gases in our atmosphere catch some of the heat, which keeps the Earth warm enough for us to live on. Okay? But what happens is that that heat hits the surface of the Earth and bounces back out to space. But in doing so, it gives up a little bit of its energy, and that means that the energy going back out to space is a slightly different wavelength than what comes in. And that means that some gases trap the heat on the way out. Now, if they keep trapping the heat on larger and larger amounts as it goes out of the Earth, it warms the Earth up, the so-called greenhouse effect. Okay? And there are 7 main gases that are regulated, which we will talk about later on. So, is it a problem? Everybody says, well, we've got better summers. It's brilliant. Is it brilliant? I'm in a t-shirt in November, and I'm too hot. I'm not sure it is brilliant. Why is it a problem? Well, look, we have been on planet Earth for just a few thousand years, but planet Earth is 14.2 billion years old. Okay, and we have evolved as a planet over that time to adapt to the conditions on the planet. It's very difficult in just 200 years to do 14.2 billion years of adaptation and still think that you can function as we have before. And so, of course, it's very difficult for lots of organisms to survive, as you can see, because our planet is changing so quickly. You can plot this scientifically. So here you can see we've got the number of reported natural disasters. We've been recording this for just over 100 years. And you can clearly see that the number of natural disasters has massively gone up and is reaching an all-time high. I mean, it happens on almost a weekly basis. Who remembers the floods in Valencia this year? It's already been and gone. Who remembers the burning down of Los Angeles? Okay. Extraordinarily, that was predicted by the scientists at the University of Los Angeles 10 days before that happened. They predicted that the weather conditions that would cause the burning of Los Angeles would happen under a particular set of circumstances. They happened 10 days later. Los Angeles burned to the ground. And Donald Trump went there as the new president of the United States, didn't mention the fact that his own scientists had predicted that this would happen. He blamed, I think, Login to the north of the country, if you remember, and so on. It's a problem because we are getting sea levels to rise. And so if you're a low-lying country like Bangladesh or the Netherlands, you need to deal with this big time. I don't know if you realize, but Bangladesh is underwater, or can be underwater, up to 70% of its land area. And it's a population of, it's double the population of Britain, and so on. So, and these are very poor countries. they've got nowhere to go. They can't build sea defences like the Dutch can. So we're really impacting large numbers of people in a lot of countries. Pakistan 3 years ago had floods that took, let me get it right, 41 million people's homes. So I want you to just get your head around that, right? 8 million people lost their homes totally, and another 30 odd million were displaced from their homes by the floods. 41 million is 80% of the population of England. 8 million is the entire population of Scotland. Now, how would we have coped in Britain if the entire population of Scotland had lost their homes from one flood? Wow. That was hardly reported in the news. So there are all kinds of problems happening all around the world. And of course you're familiar with the polar bears. I'll skip over that. But the amount of ice that's been around is massively decreasing. If you look at the big orange area there, okay, you can see the amount of ice that has been lost from up and around Greenland. The difference is colossal, and it is accelerating like you wouldn't believe. Where does that water go? Well, it causes everything to rise, of course. And then, of course, we have, as well as the floods, we've got the wildfires, and so on. The damage to wildlife and people is colossal. Now, you are probably a bit bored with climate change. A lot of people are, okay? But why do scientists keep going on about the fact that we have to keep the increase in temperature to less than 0.5 of a degree? I mean, if your body temperature goes up by 0.5 a degree C, do you notice? Do you? Or do you? Your body temperature goes down by 0.1, you start shivering. If your body temperature goes up by 0.1, you go red and you overheat. Okay? 0.5, therefore, is a lot. But maybe it's not much. Okay, let's see what happens to coral if we increase the temperature by 0.5. You get a massive increase in coral bleaching. 99% of coral will be bleached. Species loss. Look at the massive increase of species loss by a 0.5 degrees C increase. Drought. Okay, it affects now 400 million people. Rise in sea level. I mean, these numbers are extraordinary. And of course, you know that climate change has been in the news a lot in recent years. And a lot of it is down to this young lady, Greta Thunberg. So it's only as recently as the 20th of August 2018, when she's 15 there, and she went and sat on her own outside the Swedish Parliament on a Friday, and that translates as school strike for climate. So look at the date, 20th of August 2015, remember that. Okay? Round about the same time, two academics, Gail Bradbrook and Roger Hallam, formed Extinction Rebellion. Now, they actually formed it a little bit before Greta Thunberg went on her strike. But they argued, a lot of these groups argue, and they kind of formally launched it on the 31st of October. You probably know that he's now in prison for his activism. He and 5 others are in prison for 7 years for doing a little bit of climate change activism as a result of a law change. Well, look at the date, the 10th of July 2019. So less than a year later, that little girl, autistic little girl, quietly sitting outside the Swedish Parliament on her own, had caused networks of 7,000 universities to declare a climate emergency. 7,000 universities to declare a climate emergency. And just over a year later, anyone recognise that place? That's Southampton. That's outside the Guildhall. These were the protesters outside Southampton Guildhall. I think I might have given it away, though. But it didn't just happen in Southampton. It happened in Melbourne. It happened in Bangkok. It happened in Berlin. It happened in London. It happened in Nairobi. It happened in Lodz in Poland. It happened in Prague. It happened in the Philippines. It happened in India. It happened in Bali. It happened absolutely everywhere. And we now fast forward a couple of years, and now more than almost 2,500 local authorities have declared a climate emergency, okay, and have made all kinds of pledges. And this covers more than 1 billion citizens. It's inspired all kinds of protests, mainly by young people, you notice, but not always by young people, about a whole range of things. So this is a bank, obviously, and what they're doing is they're protesting about the bank funding fossil fuel companies, which we'll come on to a bit later. Now, I'm a professional environmental scientist. What do I think of this? I'm often asked that question. Well, I've never been on a march, and I never would go on a march, okay? Because the minute I go on a march as a professional environmental scientist, I can lose my credibility. I can be attacked from all sides. So I would never go on a march, okay? Do I think other people should go on a march? That's an interesting one. What do you think? Maybe we'll come back to that a bit later. But what I do know is this. The activists are using my research. That is what has influenced them. Their motives are based on the evidence base that people like me have generated. So it's quite hard for me to criticize them, really, because all they're doing, you could argue, is my dirty work. They could be saying, you haven't got the courage to stand up for your own evidence, but they have. That's one viewpoint that has been put to me. And they're subject to terrible abuse. I'm sure some of you have heard of Andrew Tate, that gentleman there. He deliberately decided to provoke Greta Thunberg. So he went onto Twitter and he sent her a direct email saying, I've got 33 cars, and then he went on to talk about them. And then he then boasted about the emissions associated with them. Greta Thunberg then sent the internet into meltdown by her very short response, which is, for those of you who can't read it, yes, please do enlighten me. Email me at smalldickenergy@getalife.com. That is almost the most retweeted thing ever. However, some of you might recognize this lady. Appears on television and a columnist in British telly regularly, Julia Hartley Brewery. Look what she said. I'd choose Andrew Tate's life every single time over, wait for it, the life of a half-educated, autistic, doom-mongering eco-cultist. Now, as soon as she posted it, she knew she'd made a mistake, but people screenshotted it and retweeted it back at her. It's not a surprise that she's not on television very much anymore, is it? Really interesting to see the incredible reaction. The point I'm showing you this is what an astonishing reaction that has been happening to Greta Thunberg, a 15-year-old. Whether you agree with her or not is neither here nor there. She's had the same kind of impact on awareness of air pollution as David Attenborough, who will be 100 next year. That's a man we should be celebrated. And then the protesters who use our evidence are massively punished. So 5 of the protesters who climbed up on a bridge and held up the traffic for a couple of hours were sent to prison for 7 years, including Roger Hallam. The United Nations stepped in and said, really? This is extraordinary. You can't be putting them in prison for 7 years for waving a flag on a bridge. But that is what happened. And that's because there's such a violent reaction to the non-violent action that they took. Really interesting, the politics of it. And this is one of my favourite cartoons about the climate crisis. So it says, look, spot the inconvenience. Is it the cyclones? No. Is it the bushfires? No. Is it the droughts? No. Is it coastal erosion and inundation? No. Is it heat waves? No. Is it protest about climate activism? Oh yes, we must put a stop to that. Yeah, I mean, a nice satirical look at our modern world. And governments don't tell the truth about climate change. Anyone recognise that, gentleman? So his mum and dad were my pharmacist and my family doctor in Southampton. So he made a speech when he was Prime Minister, basically saying that he would put a stop to taxes on eating meat, new taxes to discourage flying, sorting out your rubbish into different bins, and so on, all these things. This was going to be the new way forwards. Let's get rid of all this eco-rubbish. His own minister that night went on telly, said he's lying. So I just want to get you to think about that for 1 second. Just stop and take a breath. This is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom giving a speech in which he deliberately lies to try and attract a particular type of vote, which is anti-climate change, denying net zero. Wow, how have we reached that point? I mean, I think that's extraordinary myself. This is the same man who was talking to scientists about what we should do about COVID, using the evidence base in one way, but denying it in another. It's quite an extraordinary leap. In fact, it provoked such a reaction that Professor Piers Foster, who's the chair of the UK Climate Change Commission, actually took him to task about it, which is remarkable. Now, this gentleman is interesting, okay, because he flick-flacks between being pro-environmental and anti-environmental. But he's now clearly very anti-environmental and very anti-net zero. So who was the editor of The Spectator when that headline came out? Relax, global warming is all a myth. Anybody know? 10 out of 10. Boris Johnson, who of course has been sacked 3 times for lying, twice as a journalist. Donald, of course, has twice taken the United States out of the Paris Agreement, which is all about how we address climate change. And he made a speech at the UN 2 months ago. And this is one of the things he said. He was given 10 minutes, and he took an hour and 10. And he said that the climate movement is the greatest con job perpetrated on the world, the greatest con job perpetrated on the world, and that the carbon footprint is a hoax made up by people with evil intentions, and they're heading down a path of total destruction. Wow. Do you know who has the world's created the world's official definition of climate of a carbon footprint? Anybody know? You're looking at him. It's me. And my PhD student Laurie Wright, who's a lecturer at Solent University, and my colleague Simon Kemp at the University of Southampton. So, ladies and gentlemen, just to reassure you, today I am going to hoax you because I have only evil intentions, and tonight you are heading down a path of total destruction. Wow. Okay, people are worried about climate change for lots of reasons, okay? We've had the 10 warmest years ever since 2015. The average global temperature in 2020 was 1.2 degrees C above the pre-industrial. This year, it's going to be 1.6. We will breach 1.5 this year, which is the target everybody was going for. Last year was the United Kingdom's 4th warmest on record. At one point this year, the water temperature around Canada was 9 degrees C above average. Now, those of you who understand science and engineering will know how much energy is required to take the amount of water in the oceans 9 degrees C above average. Wow, that is remarkable. But we're also seeing wet years as well. So we are in an interesting time period for sure. And we're seeing all these things happen. Global temperature rise, warming oceans, shrinking ice sheets, and so on. But who came up with the scientific theory behind climate change? I bet nobody knew it was Eunice Newton-Foote. Has anybody heard of Eunice Newton-Foote? I'm getting a nod at the front. I'm getting a nod over here. I'm guessing a couple of scientists from the National Oceanographic Centre, perhaps. She's an extraordinary woman because everybody thinks it was Aarhus or Tyndall or someone like that. It wasn't. It was Eunice Newton-Foote. And for the young women in the audience, this is her actual paper that she wrote. She was not allowed to present it at the conference in which the paper was presented because she was a woman. And women weren't allowed to do science. Women couldn't think. Women had no brains. However, she correctly came up with the theory of climate change despite the fact that she was a woman. But the only reason that it got presented at the conference was because Joseph Henry, her boss, did it on her behalf. And since then, everybody else has been building on her theories. So look, this is a visualization of what causes climate change. You have all these gases in the atmosphere: carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, CH4, water vapor, H2O. The sun's energy comes through, it warms up the atmosphere, it bounces off the Earth. It's got a slightly reduced energy because it's warmed up the planet, and now it can be absorbed by all these gases, and it warms up the Earth like a kind of duvet around us, and so on. The more carbon dioxide and methane we put in the atmosphere, the more the re-emitted energy can warm up the place. And our energy balance is now out of kilter completely. Okay, we've got way too much energy staying in our atmosphere, keeping us warmer, for sure. And it's caused by the burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, reduction of biodiversity. Here's the interesting thing. It's almost all caused by North America and Africa and Europe and a very small number of countries in Asia. But all the countries that are affected by it do very little to contribute to it, which is a kind of double penalty, as it were. How much do we emit? Well, if we were to look at carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere, there's been a monitoring station at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii since about 1958, I think. And you can see there's a seasonal variation. Why is there a seasonal variation, people? Somebody?
More vegetation in one hemisphere than the other.
Exactly, okay. And what do plants take up? Carbon dioxide. So when you've got leaves on the trees, and they're photosynthesizing, you're taking up carbon dioxide. When there's no leaves on the trees, you've got nothing to take up the carbon dioxide. Hence, you get this seasonal variation. And you can see it better plotted there. But the underlying trend is this. So, I think that's my phone. I don't believe it. Okay, let's take it. Hello, Liam. You're on stage with me in Romsey. I'm not joking, son. There's 120 people here. What would you like to say to them? He said, see you later. put it in flight mode for me, would you? I only got that at Christmas. That's my first ever mobile phone at the age of 60. And I don't know how to use it, as you can tell, right? But look at the underlying trend. So I was born then, 1965. When I was born, we had about 300 parts per million carbon dioxide. I became a professional environmental scientist at about 330. We're now at 425. It's a massive increase for sure. And if you were to plot it in over a different timescale, see, if you plot it on that timescale, it doesn't look very much. But if you take proper timescale since the beginning of time, that's what it looks like. That is a different thing altogether. That really shows the impact of humans on us. I hate this. Any other sign? That's meaningless. Right? CO2 should be a subscript next to the oxygen. Right? And everybody calls it that. That's drivel CO2. Sorry, I'm sorry to be a pedantic scientist, but it's even on the BBC website. It's ridiculous. What you might not know is the amount of oxygen is decreasing. Because we're burning so much carbon, we're losing oxygen in the atmosphere. And despite all the things we've done, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere keeps going up. But look, we've got it solved, people. It's fixed. Britain closed its last coal-fired power station in September. We're moving to renewable energy. It will be fine. Will it? Now, how many of you accidentally, when you go on Google, end up on Copilot? Actually, what happens is it automatically shifts you there now. So when you're doing your Google search, you're automatically put on an AI version of it. And that AI version uses 17 times more energy to do exactly the same thing. Wow. And the extraordinary amount of energy and water that's used to make computer chips is absolutely astounding. Now, my wife is Irish. Anyone Irish in the room? Nobody. Okay, Dublin. Anyone been to Dublin? A few have been to Dublin. Excellent. Do you know where Temple Bar is? Excellent. There's a lady who's been drinking in Temple Bar. Yeah. Coffee, obviously. Coffee, yeah. Rugby drinking, yeah. Well, I've done that a few times. Just north of the Liffey, close to the port, is a very small area of Dublin where all the data centres are. That very small area of Dublin uses 27% of the country's electricity. Just to run data centres. And why? What's on those data centres? Right, now then, how many of you take photographs of your food when you go out and you post it on social media? Come on, fess up. There's a few of you. Okay. Having taken that photograph and then sent it on to people to say, look at my lovely fish and chips or whatever it is you've eaten, do you then delete the photo? No. Have you ever looked at the photo again? No. Some people have got 30 to 50,000 photographs on their phone over the last 5 years that they've never deleted, will never look at again, and that is why we need data centres. Really? That is what is happening to us as a society. Now, nobody this summer asked for the water supply to the data centres in Hampshire to be reduced during the hosepipe ban, did they? So let me get this straight. Okay, we can't drink water. We can't water our plants that we need to give us food, but we can supply as much water as we like to the data centre to keep them cool so that your photographs of your food can be kept so that you can't and won't ever look at them again. Wow, we live in a weird world, don't we? And then, have you thought about your emails? It takes an extraordinary amount of energy and has an extraordinary amount of carbon dioxide emissions for every email you send. Now, there's a guy called Jerry McGovern who wrote a book called Worldwide Waste. He's got a new book coming out in January. I'm telling you, it is going to knock your socks off. It tells in numbers the story of our life, of everything we do. And it is jaw-dropping. I got lucky enough to read it. What is it going to happen? Well, look, that's the doom and gloom scenarios. We're all going to die, and it's going to happen very quickly. I don't subscribe to that. I think that we will see a change, and that change will happen from the young people that I've been teaching. I wrote a blog piece that basically says that the average young person is often misrepresented in the media, and they're much better than I was at their age, in every respect, for sure, okay? And they will make better decisions than my generation ever made going forward, for certain. So I think we will see changes. But if we don't, we're going to see more air pollution, bigger allergy seasons, the spread of insect-borne disease, which we're already getting, more and dangerous heat waves. 10 years ago, I was doing modelling with undergraduate students to see where the safe place would be to go in Southampton in the event of a heat wave. Because remember, Southampton is one of the hottest places in the country. When I first came down here, I used to live in Lancashire. I came down in January. I couldn't believe how hot it was. I was walking around in a t-shirt and jeans. Everybody else was in coats and scarves and hats. And I'm going, what's wrong with you all? Because the difference in temperature between, say, Lancaster or Preston and Southampton in the winter is 6 to 8 degrees, and that's without the wind chill. I thought it was roasting down here. I've changed now. Who does it affect? Well, look, it mainly affects the poorer countries, the ones in the southern hemisphere, the ones who haven't created this problem in the first place. And although all of us will be affected, here's the really interesting bit. The average carbon footprint of the top 1% by wealth is 75 times higher than half of the rest of the world. Try and get your head around that for a minute. I mean, that's totally jaw-dropping. And a lot of them are unapologetic, as we saw with Andrew Tate. And it means that we have an almost racist problem here, because people of colour, basically, are disproportionately affected by climate change. Certainly black people living in most US cities have double the level of heat stress compared to their white counterparts. If you live in Pakistan, you have this odd situation where you have to paint your roof white because there's no other way of keeping your house cool, in a desperate attempt to bounce the heat that hits the roof up so that you don't overheat. But then when it rains, your roof gets flushed away anyway. You know, a quite extraordinary situation. And, you know, most of this has been caused by the fossil fuel industry. The sad thing about this is that they knew in the late 1970s, Exxon knew, had two famous laboratories in 1970s. They had a lab that was investigating climate change, and then they had a renewable energy lab. Okay? The lab that investigated climate change concluded what the outcome would be. They reported their results to their boss. Their boss closed them. He also closed the renewable energy plants. I mean, quite extraordinary. A lot of people suspected this, and then the evidence started to come out. And it was two academics who did this, Jeffrey Supran and Naomi Oreskes, and they have got witness testimony and evidence what Exxon did. They deliberately put out misinformation about climate change to fool the public. It was a policy, it was a strategy, it was done deliberately. They put money into groups that they fakely set up. They call them the Institute of some sort of science, so that people give them some credibility, and then they put fake information out. But that chicken is about to come home to roost, because more than 2,500 cities around the world are taking Exxon to court. Did you know that? Okay? Because of the misinformation they put out. Now, they are very rich, and what they are doing is they are using lawyers to block it and block it. Oh, you can't sue us under the First Amendment in America, for example, is a constant thing. They've now just lost that case. A group of pensioners in Holland took Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, to court last year and won. That court case sets a precedent for every other court case in the world, and the one in America also sets a precedent. So almost certainly we're going to see Shell, Exxon, and so on losing court cases in the next couple of years, and that will be a game changer too. Look at the impact of losing court cases on the water companies in the United Kingdom, for example. Their behaviour is totally altered. So we know that we've had the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has been around for 30 years or so. We've had the yearly conferences. We had COP 30 this year. What you may not know is that the last 4 COPs have been chaired by people who were sponsored by the fossil fuel industry. You may not know that. So who funds Kemi Badenoch? Does anybody know? It's the fossil fuel industry. If you look closely at Kemi Badenoch's funding for when she stands for election, it's actually put into what looks like an institute, but the real money is coming from the fossil fuel industry, which is why she doesn't believe in net zero and she has the policy she has. Exactly the same thing is true of Nigel Farage. Okay? So remember this, when you are voting for people like Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage, you're actually voting for the fossil fuel industry because they have provided the funding for them, and their choice of policy is influenced by the fact they were given money to stand. The same is true of Donald Trump. It's a very complicated world we live in, for sure. All these things have had little effect, and that's because politicians have got in, made decisions not based on the evidence, but instead on who has funded them to get into office. And that means that you can see the temperature goes up, the emissions go up, and so on. Even if all the world's pledges on climate change were met, we're going to get to 3.5 degrees C soon. So it looks like a runaway train. Can we adapt to it? Yes, we can. But we are reaching a point where we have to stop talking about doing it. We actually have to do it. That's for sure. Now, I think that John saw this, or somebody saw this, and said, well, we'll get Williams in to talk about this. So I will talk a little bit about it. This was an article I wrote with my colleague Min Kwan Kim, who's a proper clever scientist. I'm an environmental scientist, therefore a tree hugger and a bunny lover, and so on, okay? And we are sending loads and loads of satellites up into the atmosphere at the moment for a whole range of reasons. But what you don't know is what happens to them afterwards. Okay, so what actually happens is they're allowed to drop out of the atmosphere and they burn up, or they land in the center of the Atlantic Ocean if they pass through. Does that have any impact on the ozone layer, and does that matter? Well, ozone, you probably know, is the gas up in the stratosphere, the upper layer, one of the upper layers of the atmosphere, and it keeps the really dangerous ultraviolet radiation from hitting us. When there were holes in the ozone layer in Australia, for example, or in parts of America, we saw the direct consequences. So you might remember Ronald Reagan, the old president of the United States. He got skin cancer because he was always riding horses with no sun cream, so he got skin cancer all over his face. But when we look back on it, he was right under an ozone hole. The Australian cricket team, which we won't mention, because they famously used zinc cream all over their face because a lot of them were getting skin cancers because there was a big hole over Australia at one point, and so on, caused by our use of refrigerants and other things. Okay, so we're basically removing that layer there. Now, the only international protocol on environmental science that has ever worked is the Montreal Protocol of 1987, which fixed the hole in the ozone layer. It fixed it. We have repaired the hole in the ozone layer. We acted on the evidence. Now, I don't know if you know the story about this, but NASA had computer models predicting what was happening to the ozone layer. Spent billions on it, okay? Britain had a tethered balloon on a long rope. I'm not making that up, okay? A guy called Joe Farnham from the British Antarctic Survey used to send helium balloons up on a long boat, take a sample of the atmosphere, bring it back down again. Wind, lads, wind. It's a bit like Wallace and Gromit, right? Okay? Anyway, Farnham gets his readings and he goes, there's a hole in the ozone layer. Oh, it's reducing. There's terrible problems. The Americans with their supercomputers and the British go, no, it isn't. Farnham's going, no, you've got that wrong, lads. Our computers are never wrong. Come and see my measurements. Shit, our computers are wrong. That's what happened. Okay? That happened in 84. The balloon went up literally in 85. By 87, 200 countries had agreed to fix it. Wow. Technology is great, politicians are great, we can solve our problems. Now we're sending loads of satellites up into the atmosphere, so we're looking at 39-40% growth in satellites. There are going to be 43,000 new satellites per year. Per year! In 2035. My goodness me. So we said, what will that mean for our ozone layer? Well, of course, what happens is if you have an uncontrolled re-entry, which is what they do most of the time, atmospheric drag causes all the metal ions that are in the satellites to be split apart and scattered in the atmosphere effectively, and you can see it happening there. And that means that all of these metals, all of these gases, including aluminium and nitrogen and so on, all of these nitrous oxides, all of these chromium and manganese and other metals, are now in the stratosphere, where they never have been before. And that means that the ozone layer that we've worked so hard to fix will be destroyed again in 10 years, if we're not careful. So we reckon that a 750 kilo satellite with 40% aluminium composition will decompose 8.4 tons of ozone. Wow, and there's going to be 43,000 of them a year up there. Okay, so there's a lot of work to be done by our scientists and engineers to solve some of these problems. And I've proposed how we can do that by actually keeping them up there, having space stations up there, and literally having recycling centres up in space. And everybody thought I was mad when I suggested that, but it's going to become a reality. You heard it here first, people, okay? All right, I've Welsh windbagged myself for too long already. Thank you so much for your attention this evening. And as George Monbiot said, be scientifically realistic, demand the politically impossible. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.